Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the interviews here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you're interested or know any folks that would be interested in coming on the chatting, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Handle there is Isaac R11. All right, so with that out of the way, I got coffee ready. Let's talk to my guest. Today, I'm excited for a conversation with my guest. My guest is Chris Ayers. Chris, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Chris Ayers. I'm down here in Tampa, Florida, and I am a fast track customer engineer at Microsoft.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to kind of talk about what you're doing these days and all that, but I really love to get started talking with my guests about kind of their tech origin story. So do you remember a point in time in your career when you came across tech approached you, however tech does this thing, and you were like, that's the thing that I want to do, that's the thing that I want to spend my life working on?
Well, so I got introduced to tech as a Cub Scout in second grade. I remember doing logo, the little turtle where you would like forward 10, right 90, and you would draw shapes and stuff. That was one of my first exposures to technology. And then I remember in 1985, my dad brought home an Apple IIgs. So we had a computer at the house, and fifth grade, we were doing basic programming. So I've been kind of playing video games and coding in some way, shape, or form since elementary school. It wasn't till like 94 that I actually got like an IBM PC or like a Windows type of PC. And that was, after using them in school libraries and stuff. And my passion was always math, science, physics. I wanted to be a mathematician. Sure. I wanted to be an astronomer. I wanted to be a physicist. I wanted to do chemistry. And then I realized computers kind of were underneath all of that no matter what field I went into, computers would be there. And so then I just stuck with that.
Yeah, I mean, you might have the youngest start out of my guests. I'll have to go through it and take a look.
That's like 7. Yeah, probably like 7. No, 6. That was like 6. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what was it? Was it just kind of like the ability to tinker? Was it kind of, you saw that there was something that you can be creative with? Like what was it explicitly? I know it's a long time ago, but do you have
I think when I started, it was probably, I remember just being amazed at the cool patterns and things I could do with the little turtle. In elementary school, you could make petals and arcs and curves and start drawing cool shapes. When I was in fifth grade, I remember coding, and it was using Apple Basic, and I clearly remember, and I might even have the floppy disk, writing out a program that kind of drew a space shuttle and a launch gantry, and it counted down, and then the rocket lift off, and there was like white smoke underneath it. So like part of it was that I could plan something out and I could design something, and kind of like setting up a big track of dominoes or a Rube Goldberg machine. Like I could figure out the algorithm and the instructions to make this awesome computer do what I wanted it to do.
No, that's great.
A little bit of tinkering.
No, that's fun. I think, and was it something that your parents, like you mentioned, your dad, like, is there something, your parents were like, oh, Chris likes computers, we should point Chris at computers? Was it kind of like that, or was it just like, they just thought it was just another different toy for you?
Well, I did have a Nintendo,
sure.
in the 80s, but we had the computer down in the basement, and I was down there all the time on the computer doing stuff. In high school, I started helping out in the library, and I had to check out a Mac computer from school and take it home with a modem. And so like my 9th grade year, I was taking home a Mac over the summer from the school and dialing up to the internet. My dad was a teacher, so I was dialing up to the FERN, the Florida Information Resource Network, in 94. So I've been online since very early on doing like Gopher and FTP and just kind of understanding this massive world of information that was out there. I remember using IE1 and like original Netscape Navigator when it came out. Like Trumpet Windsock on Windows 3.1. So like I have memories of always being on BBSs and like, the internet early on. Um, so just always been on computers.
Yeah, I mean, so like I guess one of the things that I love to chat about too is like how was that experience for you? Like it was a lot of just trial by fire, right? Like there wasn't a lot of, it's not like, you mentioned the internet. It's not like you could go to like docs.computer.com or whatever, right? Like figure out how to do things. Like, you know, did you ever run into a situation where you were like, oh, I don't know, like I'm running into an issue and I don't know how to fix this, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was very trial and error. And I think I'm pretty good at trial and error and kind of banging my head against the wall until the wall gives way. So
Sure.
I'm a little hard headed about trying to brute force things if I have to. But um, I was very fortunate in where we grew up and the resources available to me. I mean, I had a lot of privilege in that. You know, I was able to have a computer at home in the 80s. In ninth grade, I was able to take like AP Pascal. Like I was taking programming at school in ninth grade. Like we had that as an option. You know,
Hmm.
in middle school, elementary school, we had typing classes. I learned how to touch type very well. So then, I was able to dual enroll at colleges. I was taking C and C++ and assembly at like 10th grade, 11th grade at the local university. So I had resources, I had instructors, I had people I could ask. And then actually, like, I started tutoring people around my freshman year, which I think is always like I've always been one to share information and help others. As I grasp an idea, a concept, technology, I want to help the others around me get to that point. Like you said, maybe there wasn't Stack Overflow then, or
Yeah.
or a Reddit forum. How do we help each other? So, working on homework in the computer lab, someone has a problem, I can ask them, or they can ask me, and that leads to where we are today with user groups and these massive forums where we can share and collaborate, learn.
Yeah, I mean that's very very fascinating. Like you talk about a lot of the communities that exist today that I think a lot of us as technologists take completely for granted. Like living in a world before Stack Overflow, or living in a world before Reddit, or living in a world before even like Hacker News. Like
Dig
there.
back in the day.
Yeah, yeah, Dig. Yeah, I haven't thought about Dig in a long time. It's, but I
I'm old.
think I know. I mean, I remember Dig, so I guess that means I'm kind of old too. But it is very interesting how, not to go too deep on this because like there's always
Oh yeah.
somebody who is like, oh, I remember when I first got started with computers. Like I remember in college, like all the professors that are like well into their 60s who are like, oh, I had to go to the computer lab with a stack of punch cards and then wait a day. Like
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not like
Yeah.
not that, because I think that is just archaic. Like working in that environment, I could not imagine continuing with it. Like I like a little bit of pain, but I don't like monotonous pain.
I mean,
Um,
like I said, I was in a space where we had books, and so
yeah.
a lot of times I could, like, I had CanRC. When I'm taking C, I had a book, Kurdigan and Ritchie C, so I could look through the C book and double check my syntax. I could look at the compiler and kind of learn to read the error message and understand what was happening. And my professors like pounded into us like operator precedent. Like this is where you're going to screw up more often than not. Did you put the star inside or outside the parentheses? Did you dereference the thing? And I just got really good at debugging. Like I
Yeah.
kind of started getting to a point where I could, okay, the value of the variable should be this, the register should be that as we're stepping through this change. And so we had different debugging techniques back then.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times you just look at it and play it through in your head, or you get really good at GDB if you were doing C and C++. Like you
Yeah.
get really good at it. Because the think it wasn't till the late as I was doing Borland Pascal and Borland C++ builder at the time, and they had some debugging capabilities, and then Visual C++ was but like late mid to late 90s, if I remember right. Um, but at that point, I think I was doing Linux. I'd started Linux with the university stuff, so I
Sure.
was doing Cygwin and VI. So I
Yeah.
was learning GDB, though I had one professor that just wanted Emacs, and I learned that you can be opinionated about software. I
Yep.
do not like Emacs at all. I'm a
Yeah.
VI guy all the way.
I mean, I would prefer not to work with either of them, to be completely honest. But I think, you know, it's funny that you mentioned like opinionated. I think that's one of like the tenets of technologists, right? Like we have the tools that we love, and we have the tools that we literally will leave jobs if we have to use them, right?
Hmm.
There's
J
something that
words.
there's something that you said that was pretty interesting about like this idea of like access to people that are that were, you know, kind of instructors, right? Like, do you remember, like, because I think we've all had this in our career in tech where like we have a mentor, we have people that see us and like they enjoy the experience of getting that next level encouraged to move forward, right? Like,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, did you have a very supportive environment? It sounds like you did.
Yeah. So um, I know you had suggested earlier maybe my parents nudged me. Not, I think they more got out of the way. Like I
Sure.
was steamrolling ahead towards technology, but when I started going leveraging the education resources available, I did befriend some of the instructors and did like some directed studies with them. So um, we would talk outside of class more, and I would bounce ideas off of them. Now I did realize because I started professionally developing in the '90s while I was still going to school.
Mm,
Um, Something a lot of people don't know about me. My son was born when I was 16, and so I got custody of him when I was 18. So I was a single parent right out of high school, and I was working full time and going to school full time. And eventually, I stopped going to school. So I dropped out because I had to be a parent
sure.
and provide. Um, but at the time, I remember going to work, and I was working at a networking company. This was one of my first. I'd started my first jobs in the field building PCs and repairing PCs. Like I'd done some stuff on the side in high school, helping my mom's doctor friends. Like I'd go fix their PCs, and then I got a job at a computer shop, and I would
Yeah.
fix and repair PCs. You know, oh, we got an IRQ mismatch. You know,
Sure.
modem won't work. All that fun stuff. But then I got a job working at a networking company, developing stuff, and we were developing essentially a firewall appliance around 99, 98, around the time like Firebox and some of those came out. Like we were trying to get something like that out on the market, and we were dealing with networking. We were dealing with like multi-threaded servers, like in databases, kind of trying to be stateless, or
Sure.
you know, store data in databases. And I remember taking some of the code I was working on at work to school, asking professors, and like I realized sometimes professors just know up to what they're teaching.
Sure. Yeah.
And that like you're really going to learn when you're in the real world on the job doing the thing. When you actually build software, you take all that practical knowledge and the rubber hits the road, and you learn what's important and not important.
Yeah.
Um, so I had some mentors in school that I could talk to, but then there was a gentleman I was working with at the time who was 60. So he was a little bit older than me at the time, like three times my age. And he was able to, like, we were talking through software architecture, we were talking
Sure.
through design and how that worked. So having mentors gave me my path forward. Like, and I try to be mentors to others. I
Yeah.
think because of that, subconsciously, like I haven't intentionally thought about it, but the mentors really, really, really helped me on my career. And I think it is a vital piece of the journey in technology.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of like I guess life progressions you can take as a technologist, right? I think the first one is you decide whether you want to be a computer scientist or you want to be a programmer, developer, engineer, whatever you want to call it, right? Because I think in
Or
the
an
compute
operator.
or an operator or a data scientist or whatever, right? I think like if you go down the academic route or the research route, like there's tons of opportunity for you there. But there is like the money isn't as good in that state in that world as it is in the professional sphere where you know you're trying to solve a business problem. And I think you said something that was very very interesting about like you figured out really quickly that you were good at solving problems or triaging or debugging or whatever you wanted to call it. Like I think all of us as technologists, we kind of have like that base level ability to solve problems. Like I think like how fast you can solve a problem doesn't matter, but I think you have that analytical type of brain mixed with a little bit of creative brain that allows you to kind of think in ways that haven't already been thought of. Even though we're all still writing forms over data and we're just like, oh, I have some data source and I want you to make a website for it or a client app. So, but I think, back to my statement about like paths, you can also go down once you're like, if you go to the professional space, you have kind of two paths. One, you do technology for the job, which is cool. Like you work a 9 to 5, you come home, you don't bring work home, whatever. And then there's the other path where you really, really find a love and a passion for technology. And that spurs into all sorts of different avenues as well. Like if you do public speaking or you do mentorship or you blog or you live stream or you whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I think the underlying like base premise to those folk is like you want to give back to the community that helped build you because you were passionate about the community. You want the community to grow and be inclusive and accessible and all those things. Like that's a really, really long way of saying like staying on the shoulders of giants. But I totally believe
Agree.
that's what a lot of us are in it for is like, oh, like in 20 years when I'm an old curmudgeon software developer and I'm complaining about it taking, 2 minutes to build something in Visual Studio, like, there's some new generation that's like, old man, you don't know what you're talking about. Right.
Well, see, I didn't get there when I think I didn't get to the giving back to the community or even being part of a community really until maybe about 10 years ago, maybe
Yeah.
15 when I was getting into consulting. And it's a pattern I see with a lot of people, I think now. I kind of moved from development job to development job, but it was very easy for me to just kind of put my head down and work on the thing. Like I know that technology, I'm going to get a job doing that technology and I'm just going to work on that. Um, and I remember I was working at a law firm, and this was around the time of .NET 3.54 when Link first came out, and
Sure.
MVC was pushed for .NET. And I remember this big divide. There were developers I knew and worked with that were just like, I'm a .NET guy. I don't want to learn HTML or JavaScript. Like, no.
Mm-hmm.
But then MVC was like, well, we can do Knockout,
Yep.
Backbone. We can start doing spas, and we can have like endpoints that return data and be more dynamic and interactive. And we were trying to hire additional people. And every time we talked to someone or interviewed them, well, I'm working on this ASP 1.0 project.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working on
Yep.
it for 2 years. I don't know anything about HTML. Don't know anything about CSS. Don't know anything about
Sure.
JavaScript. And I started learning, kind of keep an eye on the horizon, kind of
Yeah.
keep your ear out to see what's happening with technology. After that, I joined a consulting firm, and that's where I really started embracing the community.
Yeah.
Meetups, user groups, going to the Microsoft office or different technology offices where we would hear people speak and share technology and looking at conferences. And I'd never done any of that before that point. Never been to conferences, never been
Mm-hmm.
to user groups, never been to meetups. And that kind of flipped the switch
Yeah.
at me. And I wanted to start speaking and sharing and contributing and explaining technology to make it easier for people to consume.
Yeah, I think that I think your, progression is very similar to mine, right? Like I was doing the developer by day thing and an opportunity presented itself where a kind of light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, oh, this is far more fun than just writing code. Like writing code is great, but like the community aspect of technology is really captivating. And I think that's, in the last 10 years, we have now all of these different roles that are specifically designed to like, be outbound, right? Whether
Yeah.
you're, if you're in the developer advocacy space or the evangelism space, or even if you're on like in the field and you're a solutions architect or you're an evangelist or you're an architect who's aligned to a customer, like your whole goal is to like get people excited to use technology, right? It might be technology your company's trying to sell in most cases, or it might just be getting folks up to speed with the latest trends. So when
Or
it is
best
time,
practices.
or best practices, when it's time to make that
Yep.
change or make a decision, you're informed. Because what ends up happening a lot, and I was a consultant as well, like you'll go into a client and they're like, oh, like we have like 3 or 4 developers that maintain this very, very large application and it was written 10 years ago. And we're having a hard time hiring people, or we're having, we're running out of support, or every reason under the sun. And
Yeah.
you never want to be in a position where it's like, oh, I got to pay, a COBOL developer $400,000 a year because there's no COBOL developers anymore, right? Not to knock COBOL, for example, but like, you talk about, there being scarcity for jobs in tech. There's a surplus of jobs in tech. They're just for technologies that not a lot of people are skilled up on.
So when I talk to people, and you were kind of hinting at it earlier, when I talk to people about they want to get into tech, or they're looking at job in tech, and maybe their route is a code school or a code camp or an academy or something, I always tell them, maybe you learn a language at that code camp. Maybe it's JavaScript, Python, .NET, Java, whatever it is. Like, if you love it, that's great. You can look at companies that are hiring for that technology.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also okay to be opinionated and go, I like coding, I just don't like this language.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when I learned Pascal, it was wordy. It was so wordy, procedure, blah, like it was very verbose. I felt the same way about Java, but that's why I really liked C and C++ and C Sharp. I like Python. Many of those are succinct, but they let you be creative and expressive in your own way. You can have some style to it, and it just doesn't feel like all this extra white space and columns and braces. And I'm like, if you don't like a language, try other languages. Like, there's lots of resources. But I also tell people, if you really want to look at work at a company, you can also look at what that company is hiring for.
Yep.
Like, you can either pick the technology and then find someone who uses it, or you can pick somebody and see what they're using and learn that. Like, there's multiple ways into the field. It's just where your opinions are on that.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I think the problem is when folks feel like they don't have any options because there's like, well, not too many options. They have too many options, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I asked that question too. I'm like, do you know what you like to do?
Yeah.
Technology is huge. Do you like writing code? Like, if you don't, there's other options. I mean, if you do, cool. But even inside writing code, do you want to do front end code? Do you want to do back end code? Like, they're different. Like, front end might be more stylistic. You might have to deal with CSS and styling. You might be doing more JavaScript or React or TypeScript, something like that. Or maybe you're doing mobile development. Maybe you're doing back end server stuff. Maybe you're doing stored procedures and databases. Like, and maybe we need to talk about what those all mean. Are you doing testing? Maybe you want to do testing, and you want to understand quality assurance or acceptance testing or automation. Do you want to handle infrastructure or networking or DevOps or security? Like, the tech is huge. Maybe it's just requirements, talking to users about how they work with the product and the features they want to leverage with it and the pain points they have. And maybe it's documentation around it. There's lots of avenues into technology. There's not one road. There's not one path.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that I talk about a lot when, people reach out to me occasionally. I don't know why they reach out to me, but they say, Isaac, how do I get started in open source? And I'm like, well, you have to find something you're interested in. And then the conversation then becomes like, what is your level of comfortability with contributing? Is it writing docs? Is it just proofreading docs? Is it test cases? Is it writing code? Like, I'll be clear, like, there's a lot of open source repositories that I follow that I have no ability to contribute to, like writing code. Like, I'm never going to write code for like the .NET CLR runtime. Like, never going to do that because I don't have the skills. But what I can do is I can provide feedback if I have issues. I can be a part of the discussions in a positive way. Yep. I can do all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be writing code because I understand where my skills are. And in some scenarios, writing code isn't a skill there. And I think a lot of people they see that as like, oh, if I want to be an open source developer or a developer in general, like, I got to be able to write code. No, I think that
Oh,
developers come in all shapes and sizes.
you can like you can go out and look through GitHub issues.
Yeah.
Like they have tags for help wanted, uh, first first issue, documentation. Like there's lots of options out there besides coding. There's lots of languages. Sometimes it's, hey, I'm manually building and releasing this. Can you help me automate the build? Uh, like you said, triage issues or documentation, or maybe you can go find issues and try to reproduce it.
Hmm.
Maybe it's, hey, I had this weird bug. I don't know how it happened. Here's my error code. You can kind of read through their thing and try to recreate it and give repro steps.
Yep.
So there's lots of ways and options to contribute.
Yeah, I would love to kind of move. We talked a little bit about kind of your upbringing in tech, and you're like when did you decide? Because I think for people who might not know this, like Chris and I are friendly. Like we see each other all the time out on the talk track circuit, and we've chatted about things a lot. Uh, like you've kind of fit yourself into a particular area that you find interesting, right? Do you want to talk about like that
Yeah.
area
Yeah.
and how it came about to you? Because it's not like the quote unquote like typical like it is a bit niche, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So I'm working for in Azure engineering. So I'm technically an Azure engineer. I'm not a consultant anymore. And I'm in a team called Fast Track for Azure. So we do a lot of architectural guidance and best practices, and we help customers like accelerate their deployments or de-risk their stuff into production. So we can help them move more quickly into Azure. And this is very much feels like a spin-off in some ways of like a cloud solution architect um, role. Now I had my head down developing for a while. And then when I was a consultant, I started seeing exposure to the community, started using, we started getting projects dealing with Azure. So I started looking at the cloud. Like I'd done on-prem stuff. I've worn a lot of hats over the years, like network engineer, DBA, and system admin. So
Yep.
developing stuff, I started learning about, cloud worker roles and things like that when we were doing with ASM, the original Azure stuff, and started kind of understanding how my understanding of infrastructure, networking, and applications kind of applied to this new cloud model. And I'd already learned my lesson in the past. Don't just keep your head down and not keep learning. So I kept kind of paying attention to what was happening. I kept trying to read books and learn. And another thing that consultant companies usually do is they encourage their employees to get certifications.
Sure.
So partner consultant companies use the employee certifications to get like, oh, I'm a gold partner, silver partner, and some of those depend upon how many employees have a certain certification. Um, I have a good memory. I have a pretty good memory, and I'm pretty good at testing. And so I got a number of certifications, and I was working towards my uh, MCSA at the time. That was back before the role-based certifications. So Microsoft was a certified solution architect. Um, but started seeing more of the cloud, started playing more with the cloud, and as I started moving through roles, I went from just being a developer to kind of being a tech lead to doing some cloud solution architecture work, understanding scalability and handling availability and reliability and security of applications running in the cloud. And um, I switched to another job where I was doing DevOps. So I started doing a lot of DevOps. I leveraged all of the different skills I had and started diving into automating builds, automating releases, automating cloud infrastructure or PaaS services and linking them together through like Terraform and ARM. So I started getting this holistic picture of all of the things needed to be done. And I talked to you about like I never thought I might work at a large company like Microsoft or AWS or Google, any of those type of thing. I didn't think I was
Sure.
good enough, and I kind of got to the point where I'm like, well, I have like most of the certs, and I have like Kubernetes experience and this and that. So I started looking, and I did look for things like a cloud advocate or a developer evangelist. I was looking at those type of roles. I was looking at cloud solution architecture roles, and I came across a recruiter that recommended this fast track role for me.
Sure.
And for me, uh, it's the perfect role for me. I absolutely love it because we're in Azure engineering and we're supporting our customers. I am not limited to one product. It's not like I am an engineer only working on app service or only working on AKS.
Yep.
Because we use the technologies our customers use, we have to support pretty much all of Azure. So one customer we're helping might use APIM and AKS, another might use app services in an ACE, an app service environment. I have started doing some IoT stuff, so I can pretty much like feed my ADHD and hop from service to service,
Sure.
project to project, and I'm not limited to one customer. I mean, usually I'm having an hour or two conversation with them each week
Yep.
or twice a week. So I'm not overloaded with that. I'm getting to learn lots of different services. I'm working closely with the product groups, giving them feedback from our customers and hearing about the developments the product group's working on and helping private preview people get enrolled or helping have facilitate that communication between our customers and the product groups. So it's just extremely fulfilling for me, and I don't think I'm going to get bored in the role.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's something to say about, finding the areas that you have interest and then just diving as deep as possible into them, right?
Yeah,
I think being a generalist is great, but at the same time, being a generalist, at least for me, is extremely challenging a lot of times because I feel like I need to know everything. And like,
I
yeah,
love this book, by the way.
okay,
How generals succeed in a specialized world.
sure.
Um, and what this actually talks about is all of those life experiences. So me, I've grown up in technology my whole life, and I've been in a certain world my whole life, and so I have a certain view of things.
Yeah.
For those people that come to technology later, or those people that start in front end and then do back end or do cloud architecture, they can look at a problem differently. They can apply a different train of thought from their hobbies, like maybe how they crochet or clean their 3D printer might apply to whatever they're trying to do in architecture. So it's okay to be wide.
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, it's okay. It's okay to have that breadth. And I think one of the things that I was just trying to just say is that the more breadth that you want to take on, the harder it is to stay current, right? Because like if you're focusing on, let's just call a bunch of random technology out, front end development, containers, microservice
Mhm.
architecture, DevOps, like those are a lot of key pillars of like a generalist thing. But you have to specialize in some way in each of those different pillars. Otherwise, you
Yeah.
will like there are people that have dedicated their lives to like knowing the ins and outs of microservice
Oh
architecture
yeah.
or DevOps, right? So being able to stay current, I get not competing, but at the same level as those folks, it becomes challenging.
No, I think there's a balance to that. So I come from a consultant background. So in my mind, um, when I talk about having a lot of breadth, I want to be aware that something exists. I might not need to be an expert in it. Usually, when the dirty little secret of consulting, which I'm sure you don't have to always know it. You just have to know it before the customer. So um, I'm good at learning quickly. And so there are times where just knowing something is available, having some of that breadth to know, oh, we can do it this way. I don't know the particulars right now. I can go look it up when I need to know
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
So talking to the customer, hey, in next week, can we talk about doing this implementation this way? Sure. And I've got a couple of days to work out those examples, documentation, handle all the questions, and do that. I think that's very common across consulting that you do have one strong specialization where you're very deep, but you have a lot of breadth just to know things are there and be able to learn to pick them up quickly if you need to, or be able to pick up enough. But you're right. This is not competing with people whose whole career is dedicated to front end development or microservices. Not in the same league as them. Not even trying to imply that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing that's also very, very interesting about the work that you do is you work with developers who see you as a subject matter expert for almost everything, right? And you have to kind of level set, right? Like, how do you effectively, like you said it a little bit, like I might not know all the answers, but I'll get back to you, right? But and I've been a consultant before, and I've worked with customers before, and it's sometimes that just response doesn't really land well, right? So
Yeah.
like you're doing something that I could probably do as well. Like, what is the value that you bring to me? Like, how do you work with, that mindset of you're kind of like
Hmm.
a singular quote unquote expert in certain areas, but still have the ability to be, just to say that, oh, I might not know the answer to this. Like, how do you phrase that, or how do you have that conversation in a way
Oh,
that is enabling for folks?
well, I learned long ago, be honest about what you know and don't know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
know yourself, know your boundaries, know your limits.
Sure.
First know thyself. Um, I have been mentoring a new person on our team, and I think I said it's like verbal judo a little bit. Um, you can say you don't know, and that's fine. Sometimes you can say, huh, I haven't seen those two components interact that way before. Let me check with some of my teammates. We have coworkers that have some of that deep knowledge. We have people we work with. And sometimes it's very honest and easy to say, you know, I'm familiar with this technology. I haven't seen that specific scenario, but I got a coworker who I think has. Let me bring them in so we can get the correct information. A lot of what I do deals with this service has a best practice. This service has a best practice.
Yeah.
This other service has a best practice. They don't line up. There's a little bit of adjustment you have to do to make them work right together. And that happens everywhere, I think. You got some separate teams working together. Sometimes you need to update the docs a little bit. Sometimes it's just like one setting that maybe we forgot to document or something like that. Or, oh, there's this extra little bit of code you add. And so sometimes it's reaching out to the BG and getting the word right from their mouth. But I find being honest and going, hey, I'm here 300 level on a lot of stuff. Let me get someone who's 400 level.
Yeah.
Let me go to the PG. Um, but we'll get back to you. We'll try to get you an answer by email. If not, we'll follow up on the next call.
Yeah. And I think there's something effective. And I think one of the skills, the super skills, to be cliche, is like the ability to like liaison and find the, like, to go back to our conversation a bit earlier about problem solving, right? That just doesn't involve technical problems. That involves, communication and collaboration problems as well, right? Like, the amount of times that I've just been like that person in the middle who connects person A to person B, it's substantially more. I've done that more in my career than I've solved like challenging technical problems, because I think,
And that was
yeah,
something.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, didn't
No,
interrupt.
no, go ahead.
I was just saying that's something from consulting too. When you start, I learned that from consulting, and now from not support, but my role. Sometimes you start speaking to directors, managers, directors, C suites, and so you're explaining the value of what you're trying to do, the reason they should use technology A over B. Hey, there's going to be a cost implication, maybe a time implication, maybe a manpower implication. That the engineer will be like, "You're Microsoft. You said this. I should do that." But there's a risk reward. There's a conversation that has to be done at higher levels. And so you have to learn how to, well, it's going to cost an extra blah. Like
Sure.
you can't just, you have to be a good liaison. You have to have soft skills. And I learned that earlier in my career from during consulting to focus on communication and empathy.
Yeah, I
There's a
like.
lot of books on my shelf about that.
Well, empathy is the big thing, right? Like the whole idea of like, not everybody learns the same way, not everybody functions the same way. How can we make sure that folks that learn or work differently, they all have a similar seat at the table, right?
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that you mentioned a bit earlier, like the mentoring, is really important as a part of that too. And like, it just doesn't mean that you have to be more senior than someone. You just have to have a different perspective. Like, I love to have conversation with people that are new in tech, or love conversations with people that are new to roles, because I have bias because I'm already there. So being
I'm an
able to
old
hear,
curmudgeon.
sure, to talk about old curmudgeons, yeah. Like, where do you see? Is it just that interest that you have in like always learning? Is that what helps you kind of be empathetic and be open to, I guess, people that might have different opinions as yours?
Well, it's not just learning. I mean, part of it is just looking out at society. Um, you know, the company I work for, Microsoft, has a very big D&I initiative. There's lots of education and training in that. I know in my career, uh, I've worked with less than 10 women engineers in my whole career,
Mm.
which over 20 years,
It's a
not
problem.
good.
It's a problem.
When I
Yeah.
was a manager, I was a manager for about a year. I hired 2 engineers. So like that was a significant portion of all of the women I worked with in my career. Now, some of them were in QA, some of them were PMs, but those are, roles where sometimes women get pushed to in technology when they maybe want to be programmers or engineers or DevOps or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm, looking at society, I've acknowledged I've got a little privilege. I was very lucky to have an opportunity to do computer stuff early.
Hmm.
I was very lucky to have a school that would have technology early. And so I look around as a middle aged white guy in technology, and most of my coworkers look like me. And so I specifically try to mentor and support other groups, girls who code. I have lots of I've set up coffee chats in the past. I've tried to do like 100 devs. I've tried to connect with people to give them advice to see what I can do to help them. I usually, and all my friends know, I've got like a million links and resources. So like, yeah, here's learn.microsoft. Here's some YouTube
Yep.
videos. Here's some playlists. Like, how do you want to learn? Here's a GitHub repo. Go look at the code. Here's a learn site or doc that you can read through and interact with. Here's a video you can watch. These guys are awesome to pay attention to. Like, here's some free software. um, can I look at your resume? I'll do that. Do you want to talk through the interview process, or
Sure.
should you apply for that job? Like, I try to do that, and part of it is learning, and part of it's very much my awareness that we actively have to try to make a change if we want
Hmm.
that change to happen.
I mean, that's that. All that is great. I think a lot of us in technology we're all based on assumptions, right? Like, I assume that you know what GitHub is. I assume that you know how to download software. And I think a lot of these things, like especially when people are coming into new in tech or new in, I guess, this doesn't preclude tech. It kind of includes everything, but like we need to always have that, like we talked about earlier, empathy about how if I was completely foreign to all of this stuff, like how would best would I learn in thinking like that?
Yeah.
I think that really goes to kind of the next thing I'd love to talk about, which is you love to be out and speak, like you love to talk to people out in the community, you love to present at
Yeah.
conferences. Like, what is it about that excites you so much?
Um, I mean, part of it's probably I'm a little arrogant
Sure.
and think I'm
as
one of the
as as we
smartest.
all as we all are, as we all are.
I I mean, if I'm being honest, you know. But when I started doing consulting, I started speaking at local meetups,
Yep.
um, and I really enjoyed it. I thought, I still think, and I'll be happy to take feedback if that's not the case, that I can take some complex ideas or technologies or concepts and try to break them down into more understandable chunks. A lot of times when I'm speaking, I spend the first kind of half of my talk just talking about use cases.
Sure.
Like, you can go and look up in the documentation, how do I add this library? How do I
Yep.
invoke it? Do you know when you should use it? I mean,
Sure.
sometimes there's a page on it. Most people don't. They're like, oh, I heard I need to use this. So talking about, hey, here's a good use case, here's a bad use case, here's the experience that you're going to get using it, here's where you might not want to. Having all that conversation up front, I think, is something I mean, I probably need to blog about it more, but it's something that's valuable, that I can provide. And then all of my examples I put out on GitHub. I've actually started shifting from like PowerPoint documents over to MARP, which is a markdown slide format. So I'm trying to make all of my slides, all of my content, all of my examples, all of my demos, all in GitHub. I've got, you know, workflows there that build and deploy the infrastructure and then deploy the software. So I try to make a fully self-contained repository that has a bunch of knowledge. And I probably need to add some more notes to it. I've been going through lately and looking at them, and some of them are getting a little stale. And I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
need to fully revamp that. I need to get that one up to .NET 6. I want to add Python there and Node, try to make it more understandable for other people and not just my little silo of the .NET Azure world.
Yeah. No, and I think that in and of itself is challenging. Like I was having a conversation a few days ago about just deprecation of content, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody's guilty of it. You write a blog gets outdated. You write a doc gets outdated. You record a video gets outdated. And we don't do, I mean, we use an overgeneralization. I don't do the deprecation step very, very well. I just assume that people look at the date, and if the date is more than like 6 months, they don't pay attention, which isn't fair. Um,
No.
it would be great if, as we build systems that do things like writing blogs or building document managed systems, like, hey, you haven't updated this blog post or you haven't updated this doc in 6 months. Is it still valid? Like, sure, there's checks of manual things that people do, but like there's no automated system, at least that I've seen, that does that very well. And I
Yeah.
think that's something to be very, very interesting. And I'm guessing that probably, Google Docs or maybe Word or something, maybe like those sort of systems do that sort of thing. Like, hey, because I know like when I send an email, I get like a reminder in 4 days. Hey, do you want to follow up on this email? So there's systems in place there's
Yeah.
process in place for other systems to kind of remind you to do things. So I think our attention span is so short now that I read a blog post in 4 months. It's probably a good idea for me to go back to that blog post and make sure everything is still accurate. But I'm never going to remember to do that unless I give myself a reminder.
Well, this is where we need like personal processes and personal discipline. If you're writing every week, you're trying to publish on a weekend, you need to queue up, hey, in 2-3 months, I should go and review this blog. Kind of like implementing feature flags. Hey, I implemented a feature flag. We merged it, deployed it. I should probably go clean it up at some point.
Yeah, that feature flag is no longer valid. Yeah.
Or I should add workflows to my repos, which is what I'm thinking about doing, where I schedule builds and deployments like every week or month. Usually, what I do between talks is I delete everything in the cloud. Like I
Yep.
leave the resource group and I leave the workflow in GitHub. And when I'm ready to do another talk, I just hit redeploy
Yep.
and my whole demo's there. Um, that way I'm not spinning, but I should probably schedule like once a week or month, build and compile and deploy it all, make sure it's successful, and then like an hour later destroy it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some cool things in some of the clouds that allow you to like set, like tear down, or destroy environment sort of things. Like, hey, this environment needs to live for a day or whatever. Like that sort of stuff
Yeah.
exists. But like, it
Yeah.
doesn't. It like that's even one step above what I'm talking about. Like, if I'm
Yeah,
right,
it's
if
the
yeah,
details.
yeah, if I'm writing a blog, it would just be great if the blog platform that I chose, whatever, I had the ability to say, "Oh, remind me in 6 months."
I bet there's plugins for many of them. I don't
Yeah,
think I've actually
probably.
looked.
Yeah, it's probably just let's boil this down. Like Isaac is lazy and hasn't like looked deeper into these problems. Um, but yeah, I
Wouldn't
think
it be great if, yes, it
yeah,
exists.
yeah,
Didn't look.
yeah, exactly. Not just it looks, but like it's available on every single platform that you use. You're just too lazy to check a box. Um,
I, I'm
yeah,
the
I
same
think
way. Don't worry about it.
yeah, no, for sure. There's so many other things too that I find interesting, like the idea that you mentioned something like demos, right? Like, and I think in technology we're all very victim to like, oh, I gotta show like a cool demo, and there's this assumptions too. It's like unless you tell the story properly, the demo isn't ever repeatable by somebody who's watching it, right? Like, what are some of the things that when you build demos for things that you think about? It's like, okay, is this demo reproducible? Like, yeah, you can like add steps in the GitHub
Mhm.
repository and stuff like that, but is there additional things that you do to kind of make those stories more approachable for folks?
So what I've started doing, and I've done this in the last couple of talks. So I struggle with demos a lot. Like you said, what's something you care about? And I've wanted to build a demo like the demo
The
that
demo.
leverages all the things I like to talk about. So
Yep.
I used to be very much speaking about .NET best practices. I talk
Sure.
about dependency injection, unit testing. I talk about the .NET platform as it grew and evolved. But then I started talking about DevOps a lot. So I talk about
Hmm.
those two. Now I'm in Azure engineering. I'm not in developer stuff. So I've
Sure.
been trying to shift my stuff more to bicep and cloud architecture. What I want is an app that has good DevOps practices, security practices like DevSecOps, builds and releases, maybe doing containers and data and all that stuff. But I don't have an idea that I care about enough to build this thing and maintain it. Like
Sure.
what I want is a demo I care about that I
Hmm.
will work on for a year or two
Yeah.
and just kind of keep maintained and going. So what I've done in my last couple talks is I actually have a bunch of folders, or like for my GitHub demos, I have a bunch of workflows labeled like 0001, 02, 03. And so like step one is, hey, here's a basic workflow. Step two is, hey, here's a workflow with 2 jobs. Step three is, here's a workflow with 2 jobs and a dependency. So I
Hmm.
kind of layer on the concepts as I go. And so I really try to think through the flow of how I'm building on each step. Like I do a .NET configuration talk, and I'm like, here's a console app with no configuration. Here's where we can start adding in the configuration libraries and start doing like JSON files, environment variables, and I show like the same thing done a couple different ways as we start layering on additional capabilities. And so I have them clearly numbered and clearly labeled, and that's kind of how I've been starting to do it. And I can speed up or slow down at any point during the flow because the newer ones incorporate the older ones stuff. So if everybody gets a step, I can move on really fast. If I need to explain it a little bit longer and have a bigger conversation about environment variables and why we might care about them in a containerized environment, I can spend a little bit more time talking about that.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's pretty cool. Like I think.
I and I
Yeah. Go ahead.
start every conversation with, this is for you guys. This is for the
Hmm.
audience. Like I'm here to help you understand. I want to make sure that you leave here understanding what I'm talking about. So interrupt me, raise your hand, ask a question, and I'll be like, great question. Coming up next slide, or that, why don't we talk afterwards? Like it's a bigger answer than right here, stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I'm always interactive.
Yeah, I think that's that. I think getting feedback in real time is always very interesting too, because I've done enough public speaking in my life to know it's like the feedback that you get. It could be very good. It could be not as good. It could be really
Nothing.
data driven. It could be ambiguous. It could be related to something that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. Like
The
the
room is
amount.
hot.
Yeah, yeah. Or not even the room is hot. Just like I have a question about something because you're someone who might know the answer, which is totally fine. But I'm always very curious as to like if you're an audience and you sit for like an hour, you know, pre-COVID, now conferences are coming back. So like you're in person, you're waiting an hour to ask a question. I question is like you waited an hour. You could have interrupted me like 5 minutes in, probably,
On
or
that slide.
on that slide, or you could have just found me on Twitter or whatever, right? Like that's a bias too. Like I assume everybody follows me on Twitter. That's not fair either. But like it's always very interesting the way that people decide to use their time. Like sitting in an hour long presentation, waiting to be able to ask a question that's not really answered during the talk. That's why like I never get burnt. I never get bummed out when people leave. Like I'm like, okay, so that's feedback saying that like I need to do a better job at defining what my talk is, like in the abstract and the title. And like if
Yep.
people leave, I'm like, oh, that person was expecting something completely different.
If they didn't show up, then I'm talking for my benefit and not theirs.
Yep.
So what do I need to do to make it more valuable? If they leave, am I at the wrong level? So
Yep.
that's the thing I always struggle with. You do like a 400 level talk, you assume they have this, and this, and you
Mm-hmm.
can put that in your description, but then you still get people that come in not knowing what it is, and so you can take the time to handle that, or you can just stomp right over them and keep going with the deep content, and they're just lost. On the other hand, you can do like a 100, 200 level and try to build some deep content, like nuggets in there, but you're explaining a lot of things that experts already know.
Yeah.
So who are you trying to speak to? The beginners or the experts? And how do you get that message properly
Yeah.
to them?
Yeah. And this is a conversation that is always evolving too. Like, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to do like shorter form talks, like, 5-minute talks, like
Yep.
that is very interesting to me, because it's like, okay, I don't have time to introduce myself really, other than just saying what my name is and maybe like what my Twitter handle is, because that's all I care about is like people following me, like I said. But like like at least how I put together content, it's always like telling a 3-pillared story. And like the shorter the content is, the shorter the time span is, the less opportunity we typically have to be able to like set the stage or whatever, right? So it's always very interesting when you put together content like that needs to fit into a short medium. Like I see TikTok, for instance, and I'm like, man, like how do people
Well,
put together interesting content for
it's
less than a
funny
minute? Yeah.
because it's my next. So I registered a couple of domains. I'm my normal like GitHub handle and my gamer tag and all the system is Code Bytes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been that way for a long, long time. So I registered like Code Bytes with Chris and Bytes with Chris because what I want to start doing is short little 4 or 5 minute YouTube videos talking about some of these things
Sure.
like dev containers or DevOps topics or stuff in Bicep or cloud architecture. I've been lazy. I haven't started yet, but
Yeah.
I'm going to be dealing with the exact same thing you're talking about. How do you kind of compress down like the punchline into just a couple minutes? Like,
Yep.
here's the problem. It's a problem. Here's how we solve it. Like,
Yeah.
kind of shortens the story. And I guess you're just fishing for the people that have that problem. Like, I don't know. I haven't done it yet because I'm lazy,
Yeah.
but I
Well,
will.
there's people that have created they've created entire careers about effectively working in different channels, right? Like, we know a couple of people that are very, very good at, video-based content. We know people that are amazing writers. We know people that are amazing public speakers. And you fit yourself into that category. I think it goes back to the generalist thing is like, you feel like, if you're a content creator, you want to get your content to as many channels as possible without really maybe I'm guilty of it. I don't know if you are. Like, maybe the content that I'm trying to build doesn't fit to every channel. Like, even if I fit it, like if I'm building like like maybe your example, a 5-minute YouTube video, maybe I can't turn that into a TikTok or an Instagram reel or an Instagram story, which I don't remember. I
I
don't
don't.
remember what the short version of Instagram. That I don't like. Maybe it doesn't fit into that medium as well. But me, I'm like, I want my stuff everywhere, so I'm just gonna make it happen. So, and then being vanity metric driven, it's like, okay, well, I'm not getting very many good views here. What am I doing wrong? I think
I,
that's
I,
a problem too.
I will say small correction. I think you said you were lazy. I said I was lazy. I don't think either one of us is lazy. Like,
Sure.
we're victims of hustle culture, and
Yeah,
it can lead to burnout for a lot of people, and that's a real valid thing. And so I joke that I'm lazy, but I really shouldn't say that because that
yeah,
we're here doing above and beyond as it is,
yeah,
and we go speak, which is above and beyond for a lot of people. Um,
yeah.
so
And I think what I
that
mean
balance it.
lazy, yeah. And when I say lazy, I just mean like you said it perfectly, like that hustle culture. Like, it, if I think that I should be doing something because it's going to help me progress in what I want to do, like my career or my
Yeah.
brand or whatever it is, like that's interesting. And if I'm not doing it, it's me not fulfilling some goals I have for myself. And I equate that to being lazy, which is not fair.
Or you're prioritizing mental health or family time that you might need
Sure. Yeah.
with that. Like that's my point.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree. Like, it's pretty valid. I guess from my standpoint, I'm just like, yeah, like you could be on 100% of the time, Isaac. You really could do it. I know you can. But it's like, no,
No, you
Isaac, you
can't.
really
No, you
can't.
can't.
Yeah.
No, no.
This has been great. We're getting we're getting to the end of our time, and first off, I want to thank you, Chris, for coming on the show and chatting with me. It's always a pleasure to chat with friends about things that we both find interesting. Um, you know, one of the things I love to ask my guests as we wrap up is, if you can think of technology, the community around it, and you only had one word to do it, what would that word be for you?
One word.
Yep. You can cheat. It's okay. I'll let it slide.
Opinionated.
Opinionated. That's a good one. I don't think I've gotten opinionated. I'll have to go back and look.
Well, like I'm a .NET guy, and you look out on Twitter and stuff, and you see a lot of, well, this is only for Windows, and oh, it's big bad. And it's like, dude, it's been open source for years. ASP is open source for years. It runs on everything. Like, it runs on AWS. Runs on, like, we have a lot of people who are opinionated, but a lot of our talks are also very opinionated.
Yes.
You should use this because this is the best. And so earlier I said you said you might leave a job because of a technology, and I said J words. I mean Jira, Java, and Jenkins.
Yep.
I don't like those three.
I mean, and that's okay. And it is
not a
within
fan.
it is within your right. It is within your right. Awesome. So, Chris, thank you again so much for coming on the show. Do you have any parting words before we sign off?
No, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. And if you're out there in the community, go look at GitHub. Reach out to your local, like, look up on Meetup, look up on Twitter, find a community near you or online. Try to contribute. Try to just join in and chat. If you got something cool that you've worked on, share it. We all get better together by you sharing your experiences, your knowledge, your understanding of a technology. That's why I do it. I'm pretty sure that's probably why Isaac does it, other than maybe those follows, but
like and subscribe. No, I mean, that's a better sign off than I've ever done. Again, so thank you again, Chris, for this. This is great. And for everybody tuning in, I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on Coffee and Open Source. I'm Isaac Levin. Take care, everybody.